Hello and welcome back to Tree of Statism. I'm Noah Gutman. Today we're going to be talking about communism. It is a subject a lot of people have heard about, or have heard some things about it, but often do not understand fully or understand the logic behind it. This video is not going to try to advocate for or against communism, but rather explain the logic in it. It was founded by Karl Marx, or rather, he's considered one of the major founders. He wrote a few books on the issues. The books start by talking about slavery and feudalism, leading to capitalism as the current system, and communism as the next step forward. The idea is that people in the past stole wealth, and in his time and in the future, they produce it more than they steal it from each other. But the descendants of wealthy thieves own the factories and they own farmlands and they take a cut of the wealth for themselves even when they don't work. This is usually called profits by capitalists, and in the communists like to call it excess labor. This kind of extra work they do to please the owners. So, what does communism actually advocate for? We're going to give you a short list and then go by the subjects one by one. Communism advocates that the workers should own the means of production. They should ignore racial lines and ethnic lines and focus on class struggles between the owners and the workers rather than between blacks and whites or the French and the Germans. They're generally anti-nationalists and think that states are a way of oppressing the poor. They are pro-colonialism but anti-imperialism. We'll get into that. Uh, they are generally anarchist in theory, but they are very much statist in practice, or rather historically they've been very statist. And they are anti-religious. So the first thing was the means of production. Now, what are the means of production? The means of production are tools and things that workers use to create the products. This is not raw material, but rather items they use the raw materials in order to create things. So, for example, factories and farmlands and the working class tools. So, a hammer, a saw, whatever the worker needs to use. Now, the factories have large machines that had to be invented. Farms were often owned by local lords. And the local lords, this goes back to feudalism and slavery, the local lords conquered a bunch of land a few hundred years ago. And often, like, there was lords that owned a bunch of land because 200 or 300 years ago, their great 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 grandfather was a very good general. He wasn't a very good farmer or a very good worker. He just was good at leading men at war, and he got the loot while his soldiers didn't. Now, communists want that whoever works in the factory to own the factory, whoever farms the land to own the land. They want free access to farmland. That is to say, you can't keep fields fallow for no reason for extended periods of time. If, for example, keeping it fallow 1 year for it to regenerate minerals and so on, that's one thing. If you're keeping a bunch of land out off the market in order to drive food prices up, that's seen as illegitimate. They also think that the tools the workers use should be owned by the workers. The moral claim is very simple. A long time ago, the lords, the masters, the aristocracy, they all took these things by force, and now the workers are taking them by force. However, they have a better claim because they're actually using, or at least the communists think that it's a better claim, that they should own the means of production because they're actually using the means of production. It's a kind of user-based ownership system. Ethnic lines are kind of seen as this kind of silly thing that people should be ignoring. The communists claim that the owners oppress the workers, and the workers don't owe loyalty to the owners, to the owner class. National history does not create obligation. You fought, if you were all French and you fought the Vikings because you didn't like the Vikings, and now that the Vikings are gone, doesn't mean that you should be handing over a lot of the profits or the excess labor, or however you want to call it, to people who used to be relevant as a warrior class or as a lord class. You fought together, now you don't owe them loyalty. The working class was used as cannon fodder, and you did not share the loot equally when you were stealing land or taking whatever wealth it was. And now, the working class should not be giving you back any excess labor. Instead, they think that the workers of the world should unite and fight the owner class. That is to say, that poor Germans and the working class Russians and the working class Greeks and the working class Spaniards should all ignore their history and fight the upper class and owner class of Germans, the owner class of Russians, the owner class of Greeks, the owner class in Spain. Wherever it is, the workers should unite together against the owner class and against the upper classes. Part of the rejection of nationalism is the idea that people should be allowed to move freely across borders. The old borders between France and Germany or between Russia and Ukraine should be erased, and people should be allowed to move from either side of the border across the border, claiming it's an imaginary line that is irrelevant. These people should be allowed to form new communities in new places as long as they're not dispossessing anyone. This is to say, if we have a bunch of area that is owned and farmed and used by locals, new people should not be allowed to come and kick them out of that area. However, if there's another area of fields that is not being used and is not being farmed, new people should be allowed to come and take it over, buy it, whatever you want to call it, and form a community there and start farming there. If it is not being used, you don't have some kind of nationalistic ownership over it. There is no Russian territory, there is no German territory, there is no Italian territory. There is land that is being used and land that is not being used. And people should be able to move across borders and do whatever. If they want to move into a city, they can acquire a apartment, they can buy a house. They don't need to be Germans or Russians or Italians or whatever in order to be allowed to move in. Colonialism is a kind of version of this. This means that you kind of move a bunch of like white people move into the Americas and form white settler colonies. This is okay if they're not removing Indians from land they are using. And using is a bit of the important term. That is to say, the Indians don't own North America because of some historic reason. This is to say that if Indians are farming on certain plots of land, you can't take those plots of land. But if there are empty fields and empty places for the new settlers to come and build new settlements, just because they're white or black or Asian doesn't mean they shouldn't be allowed to move there. Imperialism is rejected. Imperialism, the idea is, one nation conquering the other. This is rejected like nationalism is rejected. This is very, very. The reason that this is very much rejected is because it dispossesses people or tries to take over other nations to be lower classes. And usually, communism wants user based ownership of land, but not for these communities to kick those communities out, but rather any land that is not being used is free to use by anyone who wants to come and use it. In theory, communism is very anarchist. It does not like the state. It thinks the states are for a way that the upper class can suppress the lower classes. The owner class can suppress the working class by building a police force that serves the owner class, by building an army that serves the owner class, by building courts that support the owning class, and not kind of fair institutions. In reality, a lot of states or ethnicities have adopted communism as an economic system, More than any kind of anarchist communism, we've seen more state communism that uses the communism as an economic system. But they keep the state army and the state police to keep out the evil capitalists out, and the state supposedly represents the people and advocates for the people, supposedly, in theory. The anti religious sentiments are strong and are kind of based historically on the fact that communism came out of Christian states and out of the West. And one of the reasons is that this religion very much tells people it's okay to be poor, and it tells people to deal with the fact that they're poor and that they should not be stealing or taking property from each other. Um, it's seen by the communists as kind of a mental drug given to the workers to make them okay with being oppressed by the owner class. That is to say that instead of the workers taking the means of production, the priests say you can't steal the factories, you can't steal the farmlands, these belong to the owner class, these belong to these owners, and you can't just take it. And it's unclear if anti-religion communism will always go hand in hand. A lot of communists are atheists, but other religions may go hand in hand with this kind of logic. We might see a religious trend of communism in the future. It's not certain if this is going to be inherently always an anti-religious ideology, but currently it is pretty much anti-religious. So, what are the problems with communism? We've all heard, I've just mentioned all the very nice things in theory. A few problems do tend to arise out of communism in reality, and they should be mentioned. The first one is that communism is utopian, and the leaders often believe in the upcoming utopia. And that leads them to believe that breaking a few eggs to make an omelet is acceptable. Now, what this means is that the ends justify the means, and we can kill the opposition, and we can jail the opposition, and we can deal with the opposition heavy-handedly because we're heading for a utopia. And what's, a bit of a war and struggle on our way to some grand new world, we have to fight to get the new good utopian society, and doing a few immoral things on the way is not immoral if it leads us to this new utopia. One of the major problems with state communism is it gives the state legitimacy to oppress whoever the state deems as the enemy of the people or the enemy of the working class, which is just generally opposition. Another problem with revolutionary communism is that it usually leads to the destruction of the state during some kind of civil war, and it kind of makes the material conditions, at least temporarily, significantly worse. Anti-nationalism has a hard time to unite the people. That means that after the revolution, or during the revolution, it's hard for everyone to say, oh, okay, we should be friends because we're all French. We should be friends because we're all Germans. We should be friends because we're all white, we're all Jewish, we're all Christian, we're all Muslim, we're all whatever it is. There is no uniting factor. We have to fight the upper classes and the whatever it is we deem the enemy of the people. Now, this often leads to dictatorships or replaces one dictatorship with another, and this means that communism is generally goes hand in hand with dictatorship, and you should see it as part of the future and understand that all the faults of dictatorship, while you can have in theory democratic communism, usually communism leads to the all the faults of dictatorships because it includes a dictatorship. Now, new advocates are speaking of democratic communism. A lot of them, don't get me wrong, a lot of people in a lot of ideological sects don't understand the meaning of the words that they're saying. They use it as buzzwords. But the people who do understand it are the ones who are saying dictatorial communism is a problem because it's very oppressive, like other systems we're trying to remove. And a dictatorial communist system is very, very bad. It's not going to be good. It's going to be dictatorial. It's going to oppress people. It's going to suppress people. We want democratic communism, and we don't want to give some kind of Stalin-like figure the ability to oppress us in the name of defending the people. There are also a lot of books written about the problems, the economic problems with communism. The top-down system really tries to plan the system completely, and that kind of doesn't leave any room for bugs in the system. Whereas with a capitalist system, for example, you can open the supermarket in the wrong place, and the system just rejects it, and the supermarket closes down. Um, in communism, there is no failure. There's just like the business is run. At least in state communism, we haven't seen anarchist communism so much. And usually in capitalism, for example, you let the small businesses sort out the small things, and the government doesn't intervene in, the small, not important details, or details that the state shouldn't be involved in. The other economic problem is that communism removes incentives. You can't get rich. You can't get ahead in life. You have a constant paycheck. You can't leave inheritance to your children because everyone gets equal things, and you can't have 5 houses and then leave your children extra houses so that they don't have to work. The children will get a house inevitably, but they'll only get one house. They will still have to work their entire lives. You can't do extra work so that your children can have a better life. So inheritance is kind of out. And you can't really become poor. That is to say, you have to go to work 9 to 5, but if you can do the minimum work and not end up on the street. You won't get fired. You won't get your house. You won't be dispossessed or poor or in need of medicine or anything. So people can just do the minimal amount of work and not even try to put in extra hours or try to get ahead, because you can't really get ahead. Now, communism and capitalism are two very interesting subjects. We'll do an episode about capitalism at some point. I did write about a lot of the things, interesting concepts in my book on Capistan. I understand that from the title you might misunderstand it as a strictly anarcho-capitalist society. However, being an anarchist society, one society can be this type of anarchy and the other society can be a different type of society. In the book on Capistan, we do actually have a next door commune and kind of a city beyond the limits that is anarcho-communist. And there is some interaction between the anarcho-capitalist city and the anarcho-communist city. Now, without too much spoiler, I would just like to remind you the possibility to buy my book on Amazon and Capistan by Noah Goodman. Hey guys, I'd like to wrap up this video by reminding you to please like, subscribe, and comment on my videos. All these things really help me out with the algorithm. If you have criticisms or think I can improve, comment. I'd like to get some feedback. And watch my other videos as well. If you like them as well, do the same over there. And if you really, really want to help me out, if you really want to take interest, you can always buy my book. It's on Amazon. And Capistan by Noah Goodman.